So that's the thing. I don't have one. I have three.
Oh, wow. Tell me.
My dad's French and my mom's English Turkish, but I was born in France. My mother tongue's English and I have a British accent. So it's quite the story and that's why it might be a little bit different than some of the profiles that you might have.
Yes, this is an interesting one I haven't done. And I know with my knowledge, limited knowledge of France, I know that not everybody gets citizenship through birth.
Welcome to the Immigrant Experience in America, an immigrant human library, where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants in the United States and around the world. Listen in as we add another story to our immigrant human library.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Immigrant Experience in America, a place where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants living in the United States and around the world. Today, we have another very intriguing story to add to our immigrant human library, and it's that of Crystelle Desnoyer. Welcome, Crystelle.
Thanks, Simone. Thanks for having me today. I'm very excited to be able to tell my story. I never thought it would be interesting to anyone. So thank you for letting me do this today.
Wonderful. We're happy to have you and looking forward to learning more about you. So can you tell us a bit about your personal, professional background and what's your story of arrival?
So my story is my dad is French. My mom is English Turkish, but I was born in France. And my mother tongue's English. So I have a very British accent, which after my 13 years in America doesn't sound as British as it used to when I first arrived. And I came to the United States, to San Francisco first to do grad school and study international business at Holt International Business School. And I have been here for 13 years now. And I gravitated towards tech, being in San Francisco and being introduced to that world initially. And I just went up the ladder slowly. And I'm sure I'll be sharing a few details on that story a little later. But I am in tech. I'm the former chief of staff to the CEO of Techstars. And I have been very excited to move to New York City, actually, after San Francisco, and have been here for nearly 12 years now. And I just became a US citizen in January this year. So a lot to share since the beginning of my arrival up until today, and a lot of the twists and turns to the story and how I got here.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so very interesting background. So do you have multiple passports, it sounds like?
I do. I have multiple passports. I happen to have the British and the French. And I have been, what you call a typical third culture kid. So I grew up with the Turkish culture, given that my family is on my mother's side all Turkish, but my mom lived in England and immigrated from England to France when they got married with my father, and my father is French. So I was born with all three languages, and I was told growing up that I would speak many sentences with all three languages in one sentence. So, your brain is just like a sponge when you grow up, and you happen to be able to take everything in and not make a lot of sense until much later. And my dad at the time was working in Germany as well. So he was working in Germany during the week, coming back on the weekends, and he was jealous that my mom was teaching me all these languages, and so he decided to teach me German on top of that. So I happened to start learning German when I was 6 years old, and later on in life I studied there and speak decent German, I would say. And then later I decided to take on a fun challenge of learning Mandarin Chinese, and I went to study there when I was 19 for over a year. And I actually worked for the French committee during the Olympics, which was fascinating and a great time to be in China, actually. So very exposed to multiple different cultures, and I'm always learning. I'm actually learning Spanish as of last year, because it's about time, given the amount of countries that speak Spanish, and that's the one that I should probably be taking on next. And I think learning languages and getting accustomed to cultures and and understanding people is just such a gift and a challenge at the same time. And it's definitely something that I'm very passionate about.
Yes. I came across a podcast recently by a gentleman called Dr. Joseph Scholes called a Deep Culture Podcast. I don't know if you ever come across it.
I haven't yet, no.
He has a term that he's coined, or I'm sure people have used it before, but for me, it's like new to my vocabulary, that you're a bridge person, right? So you've been exposed to a lot of cultures. You have that cultural flexibility and adaptation because you were basically born into and have that interest of like, learning people and their cultures, their languages, and so forth. So yeah, that's what you are, bridge people. So I'm wondering, where do you call home?
That's a great question, actually. Where I call home is pretty much where I lay my head down to go to sleep. The concept of home is an interesting one because I happen to have multiple. I feel home when I go to Istanbul and I'm sitting down having a cup of tea. I feel home when I go back to London and I'm roaming through the cobblestone streets and with my little umbrella and just looking at the windows and shopping around. I feel home in New York City as soon as I land at LaGuardia and I see the skyline. I think it's wherever you make memories. For me is something that I call home. Home is where I am in the present and where my family is, but my family is everywhere. So it's an interesting question that I don't usually know how to answer, and I think that's what's beautiful about this world is that you get to call planet Earth home, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things, and the concept of home is something that I always struggle with.
Yes, no, I completely get that. I can relate, having been here now 20 plus years, and another part of my life in another place. I have roots there, but I've been here so long. I feel like, I'm changing and holding on to some of my roots and becoming this hybrid person. So it's interesting. So I get that. So the reason I asked where do you call home? Because I'm wondering, like, how do we answer this question? Like, what is home like for you? Like, what were things you did for fun as you were growing up? What was life like during your formative years? I imagine it's a little bit different from a lot of people since you have parents in 2 countries or 3, maybe 3 countries, it sounds like.
Yeah, so I boarded my first plane when I was 2 months old. And growing up was wonderful because, as I said, like I spoke in English with my mom, in French with my dad, and in Turkish with my grandmother, and she would be the one who would tell me stories, bedtime stories, when she would come visit. And so, we were an immigrant. My mom was an immigrant in my home country, so we didn't have her family, which was the largest family, because on my dad's side, it was just my grandparents and we didn't see them too often. And the Turkish culture is so different from the French culture, right? Like the French culture, you see them for birthdays and Christmas, whereas the Turkish culture, they're just there. Reference to my big fat Greek wedding, definitely similar. And so for us, it was really just building community. So my mom showed me what it looked like. So given that we grew up next to Euro Disney, which opened in 92, I'm a 90s baby. I'm giving up my age here. And we basically integrated the community of the engineers that were building Euro Disney. And so a lot of the time, the wives of the engineers, unfortunately, the wives weren't the engineers, the men were at the time at least. And so I grew up with them and their kids. And that's where I picked up my British accent. It was from my mom. And so I really was bathed in the British culture and the American culture in a way growing up because of that. Because my mom did not speak French when she arrived in France. So growing up was really a mix of, going to French school, so being bathed in, the French culture with French friends, and also having my British and American friends. And a lot of people ask me why I love country music. Well, because I was going to Billy Bob's and I was listening to our family friends playing country music. And so I was very privileged in that way to be able to do a lot of things that were from different cultures, but I didn't quite realize as a kid. You just you just enjoy whatever it is. And so you don't have those boundaries or those boxes where you're like, oh, this is an American activity, this is a British activity. It just is. And eventually as you grow up, you unfortunately become biased, and you start discerning things because people tell you, and people define things for you. And so it's just really interesting to grow up in that very multicultural environment. And so I sought that becoming an adult. So I went and studied international business in London. And so we were over 80 different nationalities in that program. And same thing at Holt when I came to the US. I was also studying international business, and I think we were more than 100 different nationalities in that program. So I was always in those very international environments and just truly enjoyed that, and thrived in those very culture-rich environments. And I always seek that. So.
Very good. And I'm wondering, what's your favorite food?
That's also another difficult question. I mean, the French food is just amazing. And I have to say the French desserts are just the best. I keep eating all over. I've traveled to more than 50 countries, if not more. I would probably have to count and update that list. The French pastries are just the best. However, the Turkish food is excellent. And I think Chinese food is also one of my favorite. I think I would put on 6 to 7 kilos. So that's about 15 pounds when I moved to China. It was just so good. And also the different regions have such different types of foods as well, and styles. So I would say if I had to pick 3, because I can't pick one, that would just be unfair at this point. It would be the French, the Turkish, and the Chinese food.
Very interesting. So you've given us a bit about your family heritage, and it sounds like your parents, are you all here in the United States alone? Do you have family, friends? What's your support group like here?
I'm alone. So I just took a one-way ticket to San Francisco with 2 suitcases, and I said goodbye to my mom back in Paris. I think I was flying from Paris at the time. And it was September 9th, 2010. For whatever reason, those dates you never forget. And I just arrived by myself, and I had absolutely no one to support me. And today I still don't have my family with me, which makes that expat community and immigrant community so important, because it takes a village, not just to raise kids. It just takes a village to make it in any place, especially living in New York City, which is a true matrix. And it takes a lot of support and community, and especially in New York City. I mean, there are more than 200 languages spoken in the city, and that's why I love this city so much. Again, because I always seek that very multicultural environment, and it's been really wonderful to be in this city and supported by so many different cultures. Actually, that's not always your own. I wouldn't have made it so far without my village, and I'm very blessed to have built that, just by meeting people, going in the street, going to networking events at work, doing all sorts of hobbies that I happen to have. It definitely takes a village. And fortunately, my family is not here, but they're always on the phone and WhatsApp. So.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, you have a easy way, thankful to technology these days, to stay in touch on probably a daily basis, right?
Well, there's a reason I left Europe.
As often or as frequently as you'd like, right?
That's right.
You're able to pick up the phone. Hi, Mom. I'm good. I'm busy, sending a message, just telling you I'm okay. I get that, right? Busy life in New York City.
Right.
So, Crystelle, tell me, how was it like for you during your first year of arrival to San Francisco? How did you manage, accommodation, etc.? Because it sounds like you didn't have friends or family on this side. How did that work out for you?
That's right. So I was arriving and getting ready for the start of my program, grad school, and I found a hostel in Tenderloin, which I had no idea what kind of neighborhood that was until I got there. And so I had booked it, I think 4 or 5 nights, thinking, okay, well, let's book that and see how it goes. I really had no idea what I was doing. So I just remember the morning waking up and being jet lagged. And it was the first time I was being jet lagged in that direction. So it was a 9-hour time difference. And so I woke up in the hostel and then I went down for breakfast and I was nervous, you're in this new place, everything feels and smells different and you you just have breakfast and thankfully, coming from an English culture, I was like, okay, similar to the British culture, hot breakfast and savory, right? Which would be the opposite of French breakfast. And I was lucky enough that somebody who was sitting next to me happened to be a student that was about to start the exact same program as me. So immediately we befriended. He ended up marrying my best friend, and they both live in Dubai now. He's Belgian, she's German, and they're happily married after I think 12 years now. So yes, it was just great to meet someone and connect with someone immediately and just, nearly trauma bond, if I may say, just with the anxiety and the fear, but also the excitement and being like, okay, let's stick together until we kind of start the program. I finally understood and found out what Craigslist was at the time to try and find a place. And that was an interesting way of looking for a place and understanding, crafting a message to make sure that you're liked and you don't have a credit score. So understanding the whole credit score system and how that works. And you're like, oh, God, so I can't rent a full place. I have to rent a room that's sublet, that somebody will like me enough to take me in. And so it ended up taking me 3 weeks. And after that hostel time, which was 4 or 5 days, I got a message from a friend back home who said, hey, I have a friend in San Francisco. He can host you until you find a place, which happened. So I ended up crashing at that person's place, for a good 3 weeks while I was house hunting. And it was really interesting because I have a British accent, much stronger back then than now. And turned out people like that. And so I got in front of, wait lists because of that, because people would just trust it more. I don't know, some weird bias for British accents, which was working in my favor, which was incredible at the time. And also, what was also weirdly interesting with that accent situation is that nobody understood what I said. So my first year, I was really frustrated because I spoke English, just like in America, but I was using all sorts of words that nobody understood. And I was speaking a lot faster and I was chewing all my words. And to this day, when I say I work for Techstars, nobody understands that it meant Techstars, So it's really interesting how the accent always plays into miscommunication or some funny moments. And definitely my first year was a lot of frustration in communication. On top of, my arrival that was a bit hectic. I ended up moving in with an Italian, a wonderful person whom I'm very friends with still. And again, that multicultural environment that you just seek and that culture richness that you're always around, because immigrants just help each other out, it's tough to be here alone. And so it always reminds them of when they arrived, and it's pretty incredible, the empathy and compassion that I've received. It's really wonderful.
It's good to hear. I just did a post recently about deconstructing the color of language in the U.S. I'd love to hear what you think. There was a lady who did a TED Talk on, the biases with different sounding accents. Yeah, and I'll try to tag you on that if you can't find it.
I would definitely be interested in listening to that.
Yes, that was so interesting that you said that. Wow. So you speak English with a British accent, but most people didn't quite understand you, but they trusted to take you in. And I heard you say that you were on Craigslist, which over the years for me, I've always had a sense. I used it when I was in college to buy furniture and other things, like when I was, moving from dorm to dorm, or when I moved out to my apartment, if I needed to find any little knickknacks that people were reselling, I would buy. But then later on, they had some issues with safety for women. I think somebody got killed and they met up through Craigslist. So I was just nervous when I heard you say Craigslist. I'm like, I hope you were able to find a place through other means.
I didn't. I found it through Craigslist. Yes, I found it through Craigslist. I had no idea that it was that, scary, but I always when I went to visit apartments, I always had a friend or somebody who knew where I was, exactly for that reason, safety. But I visited more than 25 apartments or something like that. I mean, it's a very competitive real estate market and also expensive. And I was, a student. So trying to keep it as cheap as possible, but as safe as possible. But you asked me about my first year, the few other memories that come up, like my first baseball game. I had no idea how you played baseball. My first football game. So I went to watch, Stanford and Berkeley, which was an epic game. I also was in San Francisco when they won the World Series, actually. So that was really great to see parades. The American parades are just a whole other world and universe. I mean, it's amazing with, the cheerleaders and the bands. It's just such a American thing that you see in TV shows. And so I got to see it firsthand. So it was very exciting. And, going to the Redwood Forest, for instance, I had never seen trees that big, and talking about size, like the portions of food. I mean, it's a whole other thing as well in America, like very different. And back then I wasn't vegetarian. So In-N-Out was the most amazing burger that I had ever eaten in my life at the time. So a lot of firsts and just, fun moments discovering the American culture and learning that way and being exposed.
Right. And so I usually ask this question at the end, but I just kind of felt it surfacing now because it's probably fresh of mind. Like, I wonder, was there any moment of faux pas that could be humorous and you would be okay to share? Was there anything during that first year that you're like, you just socially, oh, that's not something you do American, but you just didn't know? Is there anything you'd like to share about something that strangely happened to you?
There are a few, but one thing that I would get frustrated with, I don't know if it's a New York thing actually, but it's to get into the elevator and say good morning, and nobody would respond. And I'm like, what? Why? Like, how rude?
My God.
People are known as being so proper, right? And so, it's just not a thing. So eventually I stopped doing it, and that was kind of interesting. Another moment, which isn't really related to culture, but it is related to work culture, is so I found my second internship, and on my first day of that internship, they invited me out for coffee. I happen to not drink coffee, despite being French and somewhat a little bit Turkish and all that stuff, which is a total like culture mismatch. I'm definitely a tea drinker, which is very English. And so I never got used to it. And I didn't want to say no. I thought, I have to fit in, and, they're all going for coffee, and New York is such a coffee culture. So I went and I had my first latte, and I swear my heart rate just raced the rest of the afternoon, and I became so anxious and nervous, miserable, that I promised myself since that day that I would never drink coffee again. And that has actually happened because I was so worried that, you lose patience, and you just, even though it was my first day, you just get irritated for no reason. And so that was kind of a funny moment that I cherish now, and that I tell to a lot of my New York friends why I don't drink coffee. So that's one. Otherwise, I think my first year faux pas, I've had lots of faux pas, but it wasn't my first year. It was much later, and mostly in relationships, actually, when I started dating. So when you start dating Americans, so I'm straight female dating in New York City, and there's just a few things that you, as a very straightforward European, as well as an empowered female, it's kind of interesting how sometimes the very, very strong masculine American sometimes doesn't take things well. So I've learned that I had to be a bit more tactful and less direct than what I normally would with Europeans, and so that's been definitely interesting for sure as an adventure.
Right. It's interesting because you just validated me, because coming from a different part of the world, I often wondered, some of my friends in college would tell me, oh, Simone, you're too picky, or, you're too proper, because it was so strange to me, because in Jamaica, you cannot walk around and not say hello. It doesn't matter where you are. You show up to the neighbor's house, you greet everyone sitting there. You say good morning. You go to the doctor's office, the pharmacy, wherever. You walk in and you say good morning. It does. If you don't know the people, it doesn't matter. You say hello. And my sister tells her story of being in school and saying yes, miss, or yes, sir, and how strange it was when we got here to just be calling everybody by first names. Nobody speaks. And I eventually stopped. And I found myself becoming a person now where I won't speak unless someone speaks to me, because over time it just grows on you, and it actually does impact I can't explain it, because you just don't want to constantly be giving out greetings and no response from like people. Like, they just walk past you and you're like, hello, good morning, how are you? And everybody just keeps moving. And it's like, it's interesting. I'm still kind of unpacking that. It just feels quite cold. And for me, it was more like I got exposed to that more in the DC area, because I was in DC for a good in and out of DC for about 10 years. And people I don't know what it's like in New York. It's probably a bit more extreme, I would imagine. But people are just more about like, what do you do? And professionally, how can we network, and what's in it for me? And they're not really about forming any other warmth in the relationship. Really. So I was just like, wow, so you're from another part of the world, but you notice that immediately that people don't speak if you walk in on the elevator anywhere and say good morning. It's either they don't move or they look straight at you and they won't respond. It's so strange to me.
I don't know, like I have to say, because building community has become something that I'm actually really focused on. Given that New York City is a very lonely city. I mean, the rate of dogs per capita I think it's one of the highest in the world is in New York City because of that. I would have to fact check that. So
yes,
but you can definitely tell. And just saying hello in my neighborhood, because of people that eventually I'll bump into, it is something that I definitely do, intentionally. And, Europeans always say, oh, Americans are so shallow, it's really hard to become friends with them. And I'm like, well, it's not that they're shallow, they're actually really warm people. They're really warm in the moment. Whereas in Europe, there's that loyalty kind of value that's a bit different. It's just values and cultures are just different. And it's not better or worse, it's just different, right? And I know that I connect with Americans really quickly. And I will have a conversation that could last 3-4 hours and then never see them again. Whereas in Europe, it's just harder to connect with people. But once you do, it's for a longer period of time. There's a friendship, however long that lasts. And it's just different, and there's no good about it. It's just wonderful, actually. And if you can see the good in those two scenarios. Again, like on planes, I always speak to Americans, and because it's super easy to connect with them, and they'll tell you their life story and show you pictures of their kids and everything. And then again, you'll never see them again. Whereas, with Europeans, it's maybe a bit harder to connect. And if you do get them to tell you their life story, then we'll be friends for life, kind of thing.
Yes.
It's just
I was thinking of an interview I did sometime last year with a lady, Lainey Denslow is her name. And she has a book out called, 2 books. One, World Wise. Second, Working with Americans. And she had this explanation that just, it was groundbreaking for me, because it put so much perspective on some of the experiences I've had. She uses the term peach and coconut, and she says Americans are peaches, easy to bite into, right? You get immediately to the juice and you can enjoy who they are, as well as people from other cultures, high context cultures, more collectivists, right? They're coconuts. It's kind of hard for you to break through that shell. But once you do, you're in their space and you're friends for life, as you were just explaining. And I remember a friend from college saying to me, oh, it takes you a while to really get in with Simone. And I didn't necessarily realize that I was behaving that way. It just took me a while to really kind of decode, like, who are you and can I trust you, and why should I let you into my space and invite you to my family circle? Because I come from a big family on both sides, mom and dad, and we always are bringing friends home from college. But I'm very careful who I bring into that, because we really kind of bring people in. And so that made so much sense to me. And now I find that I'm more on the peach side. After 2 decades here, right? I find like I open myself up so easily to people, and I'm able to kind of share more easily. And in some things, it takes a while for you to really break through that coconut. I feel like I'm still somewhat a coconut. I'm kind of like in between, like I'm peachy coconut, I like to say. But sometimes what I feel like with strangers or with people outside, I feel like I've become very American, like in just talking and sharing. That has really grown on me.
Yeah, and what I like about the American culture is that authenticity and vulnerability. So emotionally, I feel Americans are a lot more in touch with their emotions. That's why a lot of that creativity and innovation, the Silicon Valley is here, Hollywood's here, and so it's really aspects I love about the American culture. And I think you're quoting Fons Trampenas with his book. So I actually, studying international business, he came to speak at our university, and that book became our Bible, with Riding the Waves of Culture. And so he exactly explains that concept of peach and coconut in there, and, the universalism, and all the particularism. I can't even pronounce those words, but
yes, right.
Those concepts in that book is amazing, and everybody should read that. That would help a lot of miscommunications for sure, and just understanding, including in the dating world, not just professional world. And yeah, no, it's definitely super interesting. I think I was always a peach because of my cultural background, but I've definitely become even more of a peach. Why the two different things? I actually wrote recently a post on trust on LinkedIn that went viral, and to my biggest surprise, actually, it sometimes, people need to trust more, especially these days, and there's a lot of duality and conflict, and it's a bit of a mess, the world these days, and so if people trusted each other more, it'd be a better place. And so sometimes you have to lead by example, and just be able to be authentic and vulnerable, to give permission to others to do the same, because everybody brings in their personal trauma, however strong it is, and trust is directly linked to that. And so for me, what's really important is to be able to just, open my arms to others, and lead by example, and as I said, give permission, because fear also, to trust is a big thing. And so I think if everybody trusted a little bit more, the world would be a better place for sure.
Right. And I wonder how, cultural intelligence is such a big deal for me, as I've been doing this podcast and just really contemplating some of my experiences, and wonder, how have you navigated as a high achieving immigrant woman? Like, how have you navigated San Francisco, now New York, for 12 plus years, and being in the tech field as a woman, different cultures that you might be working with? For me, it can get quite exhausting. Like, it's almost code switching, and it's almost like you need to code switch, because you can't bring a very monotone personality in different spaces, because you have to adjust yourself depending on who you're speaking to. And I know there's a group of folks out there who are saying that they're going to stop code switching. They just want to be themselves and to show up authentically in whatever room they go. But I'm not sure that will translate culturally, depending on who your audience is. So I wonder what your take is, and how have you adjusted, over time?
So for me, I grew up in America. Like, my whole adult life, in a way, after grad school, has been in America. And so my work style is very American. However, my communication style is very European, so very direct. I've recently, and growing up, so I started as an intern. Now I'm chief of staff to the CEO, and so everything in between. And so I had to lead teams through influence as a chief of staff. I didn't have a team per se. And so as soon as you go into management, forget about the cultural aspect, because I've also mentioned that multiple times. It's like, you have to know your audience, and you have to adapt to every single person. So, as a manager, you don't get to be yourself because you're not there for yourself. You're there for the people that work for you and directly report to you, and they're the ones doing the work, right? So you're there as a manager, and so it's not about you as a personality. And technically, if you are a manager, you should love people so much that you lead by example, but you also lead as a servant. And obviously it goes into all the different leadership styles. So it really depends on the audience. And I think having that flexibility, that awareness, I just finished a program called Positive Intelligence. That's pretty amazing.
Oh, I'm interested. Yeah, that's been on my list.
It's really amazing. And so it teaches you to not get triggered. Because again, like, the sole foundation of relationships is trust. And so if you want a culture where everybody can be themselves, that means that everybody needs to be super trusting from the get-go, that they all need to be aware from their triggers or share their triggers openly in order for other people to pay attention to that and be very mindful, and to build a strong, good culture. Because it could also be if I may say, bad culture where everybody's authentic, everybody triggers everybody, and no one cares. And so everybody's miserable. And so, I don't know, it could go both ways, right? And it really takes effort to give the benefit of the doubt, to have conflict management that actually works, that, and process around that. And I don't think any company or actual company culture fosters that openly and intentionally. Conflict management is really a thing that nobody really talks about, and everybody talks about toxic cultures. And I think that would be a great solution. Just throwing something out there as a COO to be and chief of staff. Culture is very important to me at work, and really just building that intentionally is super important. So how do I navigate that? I don't know. I just figured it out, trial and error. I built a company, and I got some poor feedback at some point because my saboteurs were definitely leading the way. I wasn't sleeping. I was, building a company that went from 0 to $34 million in revenue. And so 0 to 62 employees. And, I was young at the time and still am. And so rough on the edges and, focused on the outcome and not really focused on how people felt about things. And so you, just like any manager, you just grow and learn and make mistakes, and you get an executive coach, you get help at some point because you can't figure it all out by yourself, and you get mentors. And the Chief Network that I'm part of now, it has been phenomenal in that way. And you just, work it through. And again, I worked in very international environments. Like I worked for a company that helped European tech companies come to the United States and establish their entities here. So I was already working in multiple cultures for German companies, Chinese companies, Belgian, Norwegian, Swiss. So I could flex that muscle quite often, and it was really great to learn all those cultures. And when you come to the table where you don't expect the other person to know everything about your culture, it creates this very fun and interesting learning environment. And when there's clashes, then you talk about it, right? Very intentionally, and you say, hey, in America, this is how we do things. And then it invites conversation of, oh, well, in Norway, we do things this way. And then we're like, oh, moments, right? So I think being aware as much as you can is important, but also being that teacher to others is very important, and not judge or condescend is super important, because people don't know, and that's okay. So yeah, right. That's my take on it.
Right. And as our world has become so global with, business travel and international business and so many interactions, like you pick up the phone and you're doing business across the world at any given moment. This whole idea of cultural intelligence is so important, and things not to do when you're dealing with certain countries and certain cultures. And I've had my own challenges with navigating the world of work here in the US. And it's funny, as I listen to people talk about their experiences, light bulbs go off for me, because I didn't quite know the language to put to some of my experiences. And it was funny because I heard you say that you're very direct in your communication, and I tend to be that way too. I find that it has not been well received. I've had to kind of, which has been confusing for me, because as a female, in order to be a leader, or in the US culture, you are encouraged to be assertive. People really don't take you seriously unless you're very assertive, learn how to speak up for yourself, and so forth like that. So it's like there's so many mixed messages depending on the room that you're in. As a woman, if you're assertive, then it's looked on differently. Right. And I guess that could be attributed to maybe biases and things like that. But it's been quite confusing here, I think, in the US, in the work culture, being assertive as a woman and how things are received. So it's been interesting. Because I was wondering, like, did I pick up this assertiveness and directness in communication here in the US, or did I already arrive with it? And Jamaica being a former British colony, I wonder, like, did I pick that up there? It's hard to say now, but it's interesting to hear you say that Europe has a very direct way of communicating. So I'm wondering if that is the British influence on the Jamaican culture. And is that where I got it? But I feel like I've had to learn to become assertive here in the US culture. I remember being in college and being very kind of passive in even adding comments when I was in class, because I would be so timid. In school back in Jamaica, you would have to raise your hand and be called on by the teacher, be acknowledged before you speak. And here you had to basically like contribute. You had contribution points, like, how are you interacting with the class? What are you sharing after you've read the chapter before? You get contribution points as part of your final grade. And so it's been quite interesting, really, trying to figure out, like, where did I pick up these parts of who I am today? And over time, deciding, like, how will I change? I mean, like, when do I decide this is me authentically? And whether I'm received publicly or not, I really have to rest in being who I am. Because at some point, you feel like you're just constantly changing. Like you're just, going in and out, morphing to whatever space that you need to be. And it's exhausting,
That's true. It's a lot of outward energy that you have to put out there, and it's hard to recharge, your own tank, and especially if it's counter your own personality or your own essence. So there's a concept that I talk about quite often at this point. It's masculine energy and feminine energy that everybody has. And so the feminine energy is very sovereign, and it's more in the receiving type of actions, let's say, and that nurturing side, whereas the masculine energy is very much in the doing, very proactive, go-getter type of thing. And so everybody has both of energies, and the balance is different for everyone. The way I see myself, I used to be very shy. When I look at a photo of myself as a kid, like maybe 4 years old, I was very shy up until 14. And then I started getting bullied at school, which definitely either you that's when you start building your defense mechanisms, right? After 5 years old. And so mine was fight. I also had a bit of a broken home situation. And so, I was definitely not a flight person. So for me, I developed that muscle of, go getting what I wanted. Nothing would be given to me. And, as an immigrant in America, especially in New York, like you have to hustle. Like finding your first internship when nobody will sponsor your visa. Like I had no access to the McKinseys and Bains and BCGs after graduating, from a master's in international business. Nobody would sponsor a visa. So I had to get real creative, which was my feminine energy, in how to strategize and then go get it, which required me to push myself outside of my comfort zone, go network, write messages to CEOs of companies like Tiffany & Co. who would actually respond to me on LinkedIn, which was crazy. Only in America, by the way, which is wonderful. And, I would walk into stores like Ralph Lauren and Tiffany and hand give my resume. Like my plan B was to make my plan A work, which was to stay in America and, build a career for myself. And, like, I think the few combinations of things is how you grow up, the semi-trauma, if I may call it that way, in your family structure and how your parents raise you, that changes your actual inner essence, right? And then there's an environment you put yourself in. For me, it was, being an immigrant in New York City, where it really pushes you to assert yourself. Otherwise, you just don't make it. It's that simple. And then being a female in tech. And on top of that, I'm generally the youngest in the room. I somehow made it in rooms where most people my age don't make it. And I don't even know how that happens, but it does. So, when you're a minority, it's always harder because you have to impose yourself, you have to make your voice, and it's not a natural thing for people to make space. And I think that's what needs to change a little bit in leadership in general. Like, mentorship in business has not been a thing, whereas in the medical world, you're not a surgeon if you can't mentor people. So that needs to come back. Making space for others needs to happen, because otherwise it's always the loudest voice, the most extrovert person that gets most of the mic time. That makes no sense, because that's not a balanced team. That's not a balanced, leadership team for a company. So there's a lot of concepts that we could talk about for hours, I think, in this situation. But I think going back to our inner essences and being able to kind of break all those walls down that we had to build for ourselves to make it, to truly be happy and be in our true essence, would be the most magical moment for this environment and world. And the other complicated aspect is the multi-generational aspect at work. We now have 4 generations at work, and I talk about that quite often as well, where it's impossible for us to all understand each other given where we come from. And I think showing more compassion and understanding, from the younger generations towards the elder generations, but also the elder generations to be a bit more patient, and also give a little bit more credit. Ageism has been a thing that I've suffered a lot from. For instance, when I in fact have more experience, have been exposed to a lot more than certain people in corporate America. To this day, as I'm job searching, I cannot get access to jobs in larger companies because they all tell me, oh, you've only worked in smaller companies, so you don't know anything. I mean, that's ridiculous. So there's bias that everybody needs to work through. And I think we talk about that word a lot. And I think the consciousness is definitely raising a lot, and people are being forced to learn more about, dealing with it. And that's wonderful. We're not quite there yet, and that's okay. It's a process. And I think just, being able to be a female in tech, in rooms that are quite influential is wonderful. And I think showing compassion and giving feedback, constructive feedback that's not aggressive or attacking, is super important in order for, the change to continue and accelerate. And I think everybody trusting that everybody's there for, everybody's good, and building a culture of authenticity and, critical, feedback and that's compassionate, I think would really help to make things better. And I know a lot of leaders out there doing the work, and a lot of aren't. And so it's for all of us to, it takes 2 to tango, right? So.
Right. There's, so much work to do. There's so many intersections, I think, as immigrants that we have to. Immigrant, being a woman, and then for me, being a woman of, I would fall in the Black American group here.
Join us again next time for part 2 of this episode.
Friends, as always, please subscribe, comment, and share if you enjoyed this interview. If you're passionate about telling immigrant stories, our team is looking for help. If you're willing to help with podcast production, social media, or Patreon management, please reach out to us. You can also donate on our Patreon if it's easier for you. All the links are in the description below. Thank you.
We thank our listeners around the world, and we appreciate your continued support as we build our human library. Please remember to give us a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, and circle of influence.